All right. Good fall, Lance joined. Hey, Robert. How are you? Good morning, Mr. Moore.
What's too far?
Maybe that's jail. Yeah, so good morning, Mrs. Lenore. Good morning, Lenore.
Lenore, this is Jeff. Danielle, Jeff.
starting at 11 on Constitution. All right.
That's right.
Go DC. So can we hear who's on the phone, please? To see if we make sure we have a quorum.
Sandra Madeline Fry. Donna Cooper.
John Mizrock.
Sean Kelly.
Amelia White, I'm an intern at OPC. Adrian Henderson, OPC. Kirsten Williams. I'm coming in the building. Lenore is the one who come down.
Okay, Lenora's not in the room right now, but we'll let her know that you're on 5.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm walking in now.
Okay, great, thank you. And around the table, this is Vicki Corman.
Sure. I'm Ted Trabue, the Managing Director of the DCSEU.
Tommy Wells, your Director, the Department of Energy and Environment.
Lance Lunk, DOE.
Teresa Lawrence, DOE.
Hussein Kareem, DOE.
Nicole Steele, Grid Alternatives.
Millie Knowlton, Tesla.
Great, thank you. So it seems we have a quorum. Let's go around the room, introduce ourselves.
Ron Kelsey, DOE.
Ramsey, DOE.
Ashok Balkan, DOE.
Patty Boyd, DCSU.
Marcus Walker, DCSU.
Jay Wilson, DOE.
The Mayor, Jen Fisher, DCSU.
John Young, DCSU. Ed Brady, DCSU. David Hill, DCSU.
Great. I just want to say Marshall wins the tie today for the prize for the best design in the ties, men's ties. That is fabulous.
Wrong color though.
I can't see.
Cap,
They're good.
Yes, capitals.
I think the director
Oh.
wins the award.
Oh yeah, so I
We're
just
not
thought.
in Boston.
But it's wind. I guess that's too. Okay, so good neck word. That's gonna up the ante for the rest of us. Okay, so I think we just did call to order a roll call. How about approval of the agenda? Everyone got it in front of them and able to take a look?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, thank you, John. Anybody want a second? Thank you. All in favor of the agenda as is, say aye. Great.
Aye.
Thank you. Anyone opposed? Okay, approved. Did other folks get on the phone? Anybody new on the phone that didn't identify themselves before? Okay,
Vicki, I don't know if you heard my name. Bernice is on the phone.
Ah. we did not. Thank you.
Bernice.
Thank you, Bernice. Hi. Okay, and now let's move to the minutes. I sent some red lines of the minutes that are in your folder. If anybody wants to take a look at my suggested edits. And if anybody has any others.
Do we still have some?
Yeah.
I think Lenore is a good.
Oh, did you?
Anybody have anything? Okay. Would somebody want to, well, I'm sorry, so is what looks good to you with the changes I proposed? Okay, thank you, does anybody have any other changes? None? Okay, it's up to you, Nicole.
All right, I move to approve the minutes as is with Vicky's changes.
Thank you. And I'll second that. Thank you. All in favor of the minutes with my changes included? Say aye, please. Thank you. Anyone opposed, say nay, please. Okay, let's approve those minutes then. Thank you. Next, update on low-income benchmark.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to you and members of the committee. For those of you on the phone, this is Ted Sprayview with the DCSEU. When we last discussed the low-income benchmark, and I know that this has been a matter that we've been discussing now for about 3 or 4 consecutive board meetings. Morning, Ms. Williams. I think that there were 2 questions that were really put on the table at the last meeting, and so we have a presentation for you this morning that'll be led by our finance director, Angela Johnson, to really talk about 2 different things. One is the first matter of the difference between the contract under which we operated from 2011 through 2016, where we spent 30% of our funds in the low-income space, and there was a different way of calculating what comprised that 30% versus the new contract under which we're operating now, where we're spending 20% of our funds in the low-income space, and how we derive that 20% of the funds. And so Ms. Johnson is going to take you through a before and after sort of look. So you can very, very clearly say and show, and there's another chart that's a slide or 2 later that will clearly show you what was in what we call the numerator and the numerator is really the operative point here. The denominator has remained the same over the years. You include all costs in the denominator, but in the numerator, there are certain specific costs that are associated with low-income spending. So Ms. Johnson will walk you through what those costs were in the numerator under the old contract versus what they are under the new contract. Secondarily, there was a question by Madam People's Counsel, Sandra Matterby-Fry, where there was a question about breaking down the types of expenditures under the low-income benchmark versus single-family, multifamily, clinics, shelters, etc. And so we will show you a numeric breakdown in terms of how much on a dollar basis and a percentage basis that we're spending in all of those different categories. Sandra, am I appropriately capturing your question?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and thank you for responding to my inquiry.
Okay.
And I'm looking forward to your session at the office.
Yes.
And
I'm going to sit down with Madam People's Counsel and her staff next week after I get back from my 36th college reunion. And we will discuss this further. And thank you for the opportunity to let me come over to your office and talk to you about this. I want to thank you, Madam Chair, and Ms. Knowlton for coming over to our offices last Friday to talk about some of the work that we might be able to do here in the District of Columbia. Thank you for that visit as well. And for any of the other board members, again, the invitation is open. If you'd like me to come to your office or you'd like to come to ours to discuss any of these issues, please understand that our doors are always open for you and for us to have that kind of conversation. Because I know Ms. Williams, we were at your office a couple months ago, had a very good conversation with your membership. So again, thank you for having us when we've been able to go over and have those kind of deeper discussions, more than we can have here in the limited amount of time we get on a monthly basis. But I'm going to let Ms. Johnson come up and walk you through the presentation. Angela Johnson has been with us for over a year now.
A year.
Just celebrating 1 year?
A year in May.
A year in May. That's over a year now because it's middle of June.
Yeah.
And so thank her for being here with us, and the floor is yours.
So I know there were a lot of questions about how we calculated the low-income spend prior to the modification. So the first slide is pretty self-explanatory. There was no change in the denominator. The denominator is total cost. The change was in the numerator, and originally, prior to the modification, we did total low-income cost. And the difference in the mod is that we do total direct. So originally, we did total direct and indirect low-income spend. And I'm going to show some examples so you can differentiate between the direct and indirect. So you can flip to the next slide. So this is a description of the treatment of the cost prior to the modification and after the modification. And you'll see the type of program expense, and you'll see the numerator and denominators. So obviously the denominator did not change prior to the mod and after the mod. If you talk about labor, it was included, direct labor was included in the numerator prior to the modification. Direct fringe, incentives, subcontract costs, materials, local travel, telephones and internet were never included in the numerator, both prior to and after the modification. Same thing with rent. Rent was not included in the numerator prior to or after the mod. Now you see the blue items are the items that changed after the modification. So initially copying and printing and postage, equipment, software, indirect costs, any operating fee or any G&A costs that were allocated to low income were included in the numerator. They're no longer included in the numerator. So the only thing included in the numerator is labor, direct fringe, incentives paid to customers and contractors, subcontractor payments, materials like energy kits, local travel, and that's it. So you actually get more bang for your buck now because it is a direct cost. So if you can flip to the next slide. And this is
Donna Cooper. I just had one question.
Uh-huh.
You said that it's no longer included in the numerator. What variables influenced the inclusion before and obviously the change now, which obviously is positive because I guess more dollars can go towards the program.
Right. But I'm sorry, say it again. Can you repeat the question?
This was inquiring as to why previously it was included in the numerator versus the change now.
I can't speak to that, so maybe someone can talk about why it was changed.
Well, previously it was included in the numerator because we never defined what variables went into the numerator. If you look at the language in the original definition, it only spoke to what go into the denominator, and in the numerator it says DCSU spending on low-income programs, which was never really defined. So the way DCSU did their accounting and billing, they tried to attribute all of their costs across 4 program areas, low-income, commercial, CNI, so everything was broken down to those 4 categories. Even something as simple as paying telephone or even travel or stuff like utilities were all tracked back to a particular program when we initially started this contract, because we never clearly defined such things as admin costs versus indirect costs versus programmatic costs as we now have in the new contract.
Thank you very much.
This is Sandra. So now the costs that were previously included for the low income spend are now included as general costs?
Well, some of the costs we've made clear that shouldn't be counted towards low income spend. For example, the DCSU's indirect cost that's attributable across the entire operation. A portion of that initially used to be assigned to low income programs. We've now made it clear that all indirect costs are something that goes into the denominator and shouldn't be characterized as a programmatic cost or even part of the low income equation.
But it is for the other programs?
No, it's not for any program at all.
Okay.
So indirect is just something that goes into the numerator. It wouldn't be applied to any of the other programs.
We're capped at 20% indirect. We're under our cap. Last year we were at 18.1%.
And I'm sorry, the cap is at what?
20%.
20, and it was at 18.1?
18.1 last year.
Cool.
So in this slide, I wanted to show you what our target is based on our current funding, which is 20% of the 18.5 is a 3.7. And right now, our budget or estimated spending, you'll see that 93% of our spending is going to be direct incentive payments and subcontract payments. And 7% will be salaries, fringe, travel, and materials. So, I mean, that's a good piece of money, and that's direct incentive and subcontract dollars that are the 93% of that is a part of the budget. So
admin costs for this are only 7%?
well, it's not, it's salaries. We have a low-income project manager that we hired earlier this year, so it would be the salary of that person and anyone else that directly works on a low-income project, like an engineer, like doing an inspection or something like that. And then local travel, materials would be like energy kits, the light bulbs or something like that, so those would be direct materials.
I'm sorry, I'm not asking right. So aren't admin expenses?
When you say admin, we define admin, not G&A, not, now these salaries are salaries for someone that directly charges the low-income program. It would just be the low-income manager, anyone like I said, engineer, it would just be those salaries, not the, salaries of the manager or receptionist or,
And you want a salary,
inside,
a portion of your salary.
Yeah, none of my
and then
salary.
moving, making sure the money and the checks get cut is not included.
It's not
It's
included in the 7%.
It's not included
Not
in the
including
low-income
that
spend at all.
7%.
But it's under the admin cap.
Yeah.
That's the contract.
Anything that's in the admin 20% cap.
So in the low income arena, what is it does 93%.
Low income doesn't have any admin in the sense that you're talking about general administrative costs. Low income doesn't, in the numerator, low income doesn't have any general administrative costs. In the denominator, which is all of our costs, the 19.1, that's inclusive of all of our costs. But in the numerator, which is the 33.7 million, there's no general administrative costs, there's no indirect costs, direct program costs. And 93% of that direct program cost is incentives and subs, and 7% of those direct costs are direct salaries, direct materials, that type of thing.
Okay, so is this 93 and 7 of what's in the numerator only, not?
Yes.
Okay, what would that translate to in terms of over the denominator?
That's what 20%.
The total
20%. So they would be 20. The 3.7 is 20% of the total spend. Yeah, which is our eventually we have to do a minimum of 20% spend, and the 3.7 represents that 20%. Of that 20%, 93% of that 20 is incentives and subs, and 7% of that 20% is the direct salaries, fringe, travel, and material.
Let me help you with the math a little. Ms. Johnson, you start our total annual budget at what number?
It's about 18.5.
18.5. So, of 18.5, which is our total budget for the year, 3.7 is 20%.
It's 20% of that. That's what we have to get. We have to spend a minimum of 20% of the 18.5 on low income. So that's the 3.7.
And that was pegged due to there was some question about leveraging for the moving targets. So it was pegged
It's 20% of our total SETF funds that we do.
of the
Yes.
Right. If we were to
Savings were paid.
Yes. So it's 20% of the SETF funds that we do.
Direct spend. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's really 18,558. It's an odd number.
18.5.
We're rounding. Yeah. And I mean, yeah. So does that help?
Sorta.
But you see that that's 3.7 is 20% of what we receive in SETF money that we have right now. That's what the 3.7 represents. And I'm just showing you a breakout of how that's our target. So that's what we have to spend in low income. And then I'm just showing you the direct spend, how that direct spend is broken out. And I just want you to see that 93% of that is cash to go right out the door, incentive dollars to go right out the door to subcontractors, to customers. And then the other 7% is, cost, direct costs that go for salaries like our low-income project manager, travel, mostly local travel, and materials like energy kits and bulbs and things of that nature. So those are direct dollars. They have no G&A on top of them, no overhead or anything like that. They're just direct costs that go out the door.
if there's still some puzzlement in your mind, let us help you unpack that.
Okay.
So,
So if you added the GNA and all that,
Well, we don't, the GNA from a total spend perspective, we have a 20% cap. But when we're trying to reach our target for low income, GNA is not even in the equation, only in the total, the 19, the total 18.5 is what we have received so far in SETF funds. And part of that is GNA, and part of that is all these other costs. But there, again, that 18.5 is the denominator, and the numerator is the target. So the GNA, it doesn't, I mean, there is GNA that we attribute to these costs, but they're not, they can't be in the target. They've been removed from the target. Previously, they were included in that, in the how we achieve that target, but no longer. We had to back out all that indirect, back out all that GNA, and we only have direct dollars that go out the door.
So, yeah, I'm just trying to, I guess I've just always been under the impression that comparing incentives and subcontractors and things that go to third parties in the non-low income arena, or just generally, is more like in the 40s, or is in the 50% arena, compared with other SEU, like on the next slide.
Okay, let's go
Yeah,
to the next.
we'll get there in a second, but
Okay.
just 93% is great. It just seems like it's more than in other programs.
It is, well, I mean, if you're accounting for costs and depending on what the requirements are for the cost, the other costs may have costs that are not included, like indirect costs, but because the low income modification removed indirect costs, you just have direct dollars, so that's why your percentage goes up.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm sorry, it's a little opaque, I guess, because to me anyway. No, we've always been talking about how in order to accomplish savings or accomplish projects requires people in the SEU to help, to fill out forms and to say, here's where we can make changes. And there's a lot of staff work. And that's what I'm trying to understand, if it's only 7% is required.
Well, because, the thing
as
is,
opposed to
it may require that, but we can't count those dollars in achieving our target. So you're right. There are people like myself that, right now, there are a lot of people that work on things that are related to low income programs because the modification said that we could not include those indirect costs in our target.
In the
we
target.
Have to take them out. Yep.
Well, then where would those costs be reflected, or what would they be a percentage of the additional staff time?
Depending on what it is, if it's like if it's general administrative costs, it could be GNA or other programs, but not in the target. So like I said, you get more bang for your buck. Maybe the next slide, my boy.
Okay.
So this is an example invoice, and I just wanted to highlight, now after the modification, how the cost. So you see at the top, labor and fringe would be included in the numerator for low income, and then you would have incentives, subs, and materials are included in the numerator, and then a little bit of travel, and then everything in yellow is no longer included in that target number. In order for us to achieve that 3.7, we can't include any things in the yellow. Doesn't mean we don't incur those costs. It just means we can't count those toward achieving our target. So we incur those costs, but we can't count them in terms of achieving our target. The low income target.
Right.
Which is, like I said, so you get more of a, you get, again, you get incentives and subs and materials, really direct dollars that go out the door without anything else tied to them.
Right, so here on this page, the incentives and subcontractors are like, 8 something.
Well, this is a sample invoice.
Right, so I'm just trying to, so it's 8 something
And
out of.
this is not the annual, this is a month.
This would be a
Right.
monthly invoice.
Right. So I was just trying to understand between slides 3 and 4. So the incentives are 700,000 something. The contractor is 158,000.
Yeah.
So that's like 858, 860, whatever, out
Right.
of 1.6, which
Right.
is like 50%.
Right.
That particular.
That particular month.
Right. And
But
I was
every
just trying to
month is
understand how
But we
that
wouldn't have
equates to the
But
prior
we wouldn't have a
page.
low income invoice of 1.6 in a month. 3.7 is our target for the year.
Isn't it just low income though?
No, this is not
Yeah,
low
this is-
income. This is not just low income.
Think of that as a template. These are not real numbers.
don't.
They just illustrate the colors of what you're looking at and the
Just the
title.
type of
Yeah,
cost.
I'm just trying to understand the proportions.
Yeah.
So on this template, that's an example of something. Like the incentives and subcontractors look like they're in the 50% vicinity. On slide 3, the incentives and subcontractors are in the 93%.
But they're 90%.
One is a budget, right? And the other is just.
So this would be a typical invoice for a month from DCSU to DOEE for all of our programs, including custom, efficient products, everything that we do.
Because we only pay, 3.7 is the target for low income.
Right. The
can
other
let me-
slide was what we accomplished in FY17.
Let me see if I can help you out and answer this differently. Across the DCSU's operation, in the low-income area, you will find the largest percentages of incentives and subcontractor spending for two main reasons. One, it costs a whole lot more to do low-income work. So whereas you can give a business maybe 10-15% of the cost for them to do a measure, in the low-income space, you typically spend 100% on the cost to do the measure. Secondly, when it comes to creating the green jobs, a lot of the subcontractors and their staff work in the low-income space, doing the direct installs to help us count those green job hours. Hence, the reasons why in the low-income space, incentives and subcontractor spending will be highest compared to maybe the commercial sector or renewables or any other program space where the DCSU operations are concerned. So trying to understand the proportions of spending as it relates to incentives and subcontractors, yes, you'll see the heart of that occurring in the low-income space versus if you look at any other sector.
So it's the nature of the work is markedly different.
Yes,
higher.
it is.
Yes, higher percentage of the cost to complete the work. in low income as opposed to high level.
And you've artificially carved out just those direct costs, so we're not going to include a bunch of other things that would take money away from that.
But are still part of accomplishing the work.
Right, but we can't use those to achieve our target though.
I would agree with everything you said except the word artificial.
It's real.
It's real. I mean, this is a very,
legitimate way.
yeah, you know, after numerous discussions and stuff about what would actually be attributable. But yes,
Deliberate.
Intention.
So can we? Oh, yeah.
Is it it's just one person in that 7%?
Well, we have one full-time, but other people, like
There's
we
a
have our,
couple percentages.
percentages of others. We have one full-time low-income manager that we hire, but other project managers and also like the engineers.
And account managers trying to come out of my time helping with strategy.
Okay.
So can we hit that? Okay, and this was attachment J that was in the presentation, and it kind of breaks out the general administrative costs that are not included in the numerator. Costs that are allocated across multiple programs like IT, human resources, finance, which are not included in the numerator but part of the denominator. That's just that's part of our contract attachment J15. Okay, next slide. So this is 2017. I know this came up about how we spent our dollars, low-income dollars in 2017, and you can see the type of incentives that we paid out. Multifamily incentives was 71%. Shelters we did 10%. Food bank and DC Central Kitchen was 4%. Just a little bit on single-family incentives, and then income qualifying lighting. So if you add it all up, you'll see that. Again, subcontract incentives was like 95% of our spend last year was in incentives and subcontract costs going out the door, and 5% was labor, fringe, and materials. So it's even better.
Yeah,
It
it's
went
a
up to
question
that.
about the incentives specifically. So where it says like multifamily, shelter, food bank, single family. Can you just talk a little bit about like what like an example of like a multifamily incentive, shelter incentive?
Sure. So, and I wanted to pull out another number too. I just ran a report, and 1.3 million of the total incentives went to CBD contractors, to about 5 or 6 CBD contractors. So 1.3 million of that number is about 38% went to CBD.
Do you have a CBD percentage requirement?
We have a spend, it's
We have a spend requirement.
35, but we always, this year, we
35
actually,
overall,
well, yes, after exclusions, I mean, yes.
and not specific to
Low income.
Yes, I mean,
Not specific to local.
yeah.
So a typical project, we have a lot of them: heat pumps, lighting, boilers, domestic hot water heaters, chiller replacements. A lot of lighting. And I could give you some.
Who was that
names
shelter?
of
What was that
names of
shelter?
the shelters.
Phyllis Wheatley, who was that?
Phyllis Wheatley is the YWCA, and that was a custom program. I'm not sure exactly what we did there, but it serves about 117 beds per women. It seems that we did a few different measures there. Blair House, Emory work bed. We had a press release on the Emory work bed, and we've submitted them for the back panel, the behavioral conference that's coming up. We presented to try to chair a speaking session on that one. In terms of the income qualified bulk lighting, that was the light heap where we distributed light bulbs. The energy kits also were distributed. And then DC Central Kitchen was lighting. The food bank, we did some refrigeration work. They had some broken doors going up and down. So we invested in having the quick open and close to not waste as much refrigeration.
And are these paid after the repairs are made, or is it an upfront?
We really don't do anything up front.
Okay.
So after and the ones that with CDEs are work order based. So there's a specific contract between us and
Okay. Cool. And then the single family, is that different from the energy kits, or?
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a layover from a previous year. We had a couple outstanding houses that needed to be worked on, but we no longer have a direct single family effort.
Gotcha. And it's specific to EE energy efficiency.
And we actually spent $65,000 more than our target in 2017. So that was a good.
Quick follow-up, DC Central Kitchen, I understand got a grant to build a new building. Are you involved in
we may be in our custom program. We can check.
So is there a way to show what, like another column where you have the amount, total percentage of the spend, how that gets you to your goal? So if, for example, your low income percentage goals are 30% of the overall target. So if that 71% is 20% of that target, or so that you can see where you're getting your best bang for your buck in terms of
what you're seeing here is the 20% of our overall budget must be spent in the low income states. I think the question you're asking is, we also have to achieve roughly 10% of our overall savings in that space. And so is the question then, let's say, did multifamily incentives comprise 71% of that savings or some different number?
exactly?
We have.
Yes, we can.
That may be difficult to do.
Well, we actually have budget.
Yes.
I can give you that today.
Not today, not today.
But when we put together our budget, and we have our low-income budget, what our program director does is we look at the types of projects that we can do and what the yield is for that project and the money that we're spending. So we have to tie to the dollars and also to our spend target. So they do that and they track that.
So you do that before
As
when
we
you're
go along.
proposing the project, or like at the end when you assess?
As we go along before.
You have to
Both?
follow up with an analysis.
Yeah.
Before.
And the first analysis is kind of quick and dirty and a lot conservative. And then as the project is happening, we'll get the engineers to do an official analysis to make sure everything is all right. It usually gets to be a little bit more savings through that process. Yeah, but the income qualified, the lights, the bulk lighting is part of the TRM. It's a designated, enabled this many watts that you save.
I'm looking at the TRM. Thanks for that. Thank you.
I think that's helpful.
Oh, no. Any
Any
other questions?
questions?
I just meant thank you for that answer. I didn't mean to cut anybody off.
No, you didn't.
Well, thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very much. Thank you. Happy anniversary. Okay, so thank you very much for that. I know that we've been looking at this for a long time, so I appreciate it. So let's go to the proposed modification.
Yes, good morning again. We sent around draft mod 4 about 2 weeks ago for comments from the board, and I'm eagerly looking forward to hear from folks this morning whether they have any comments on the mod, since we did not receive any in writing. But to quickly summarize the main points of this mod, one is to add $375,000 that the SEU received through their work with PJM. As some of you may know, we bid efficiency savings into PJM's capacity market and receive quarterly payments on those savings. That $375,000 represents money that was collected, I would say, about over a 1.5 year period. And pursuant to the SEU contract, funds that come in through PJM go back into the SEU's operation to expand programming. So the first line on, if you're looking at the mod on the CLIN table for base year 2, which is the current fiscal year we're in, prior to this mod, the cost reimbursement ceiling was capped at $18,558,000. We've increased that, as you can see, by roughly $375,000 to take that up to $18,900. That is the money that the DCSU has available or will have available for programming. It does not include their performance incentive, which is captured in line 3 if they meet or exceed those targets. The second thing that's included in this mod is some funding for our Solar for All program efforts. As you may recall, we briefed the board several weeks back about the DCSU undertaking a Solar for All program initiative beginning in fiscal year 2018 and expanding over the next 3 fiscal years. The intent here with this $250,000 is for the DCSU to be able to start developing a program plan, hiring the necessary staff, and putting all of the pieces in place so that the program can be fully operational come October 1. Outside of that, most of the other changes are what I would say very cosmetic and academic, because we need to make sure that in certain areas of the contract, the money that we're adding for the Solar for All program does not commingle or distort the funding that we have available from the SETF. We wanted to keep those 2 pots of money completely separate because this funding here would not impact the SEU's benchmarks. They are still going to be responsible for hitting all of the targets that are laid out in the contract. So this will be tracked and accounted for separately. And with that, I think I would like to turn to any questions from the group regarding this particular mod.
So on the Solar for All, you're doing some solar now, right? Or this is...
Yeah, we're doing a lot of solar now through grantees, several grantees that we've put out. As you may recall, roughly $13 million in grants to several grantees that are doing several aspects of the Solar for All.
So this is to focus on a larger program, and to use the REDF funds?
Yes, this will use REDF funds.
You got $26 million this year?
Yeah, we collected $26 million this year, and we've put together a spending plan. Some of those funds will go to the SEU. Both, as you can see, the $249 here, and then hopefully another $12 million or so in FY19. The intent is to use the DCSU as another tool in the box to implement our Solar for All.
So just so I'm clear, the 250 is for FY18, and then the bulk amount will come in on October.
Yes.
And so the 250 is for essentially like setting up the program,
yes, developing the RFPs and so forth, and all of those things that can be ready to go.
Okay. And then how is, I know we talked a few meetings back around sort of supporting a Solar for All program through SREC leverage. How is that mixed into this budget?
The SREC leverage program is coming out pretty much from the $18 million that you see on the top. That's a separate program initiative that's funded through the SETF. That the SEU is using SETF dollars to leverage additional outside funding to both help them meet their leveraging benchmark and to also help facilitate the installation of some systems by one of the Solar for All grantees.
Okay, so the SRECs are being supported through SETF dollars.
Yes.
And then when those SREC amounts, the brokerage amount comes back in the door, which bucket do they go into?
The first one.
SETF
Yes, they go
bucket.
back into the
So
SETF.
those dollars, even though they're supporting a Solar for All program, go back into the SETF.
Because
Okay.
we're using the SETF dollars in the first place to help bring them in, so to speak.
And I assume those dollars are going specific to like programmatic SETF work.
We're not specifying what the SEU will do with that money. Again, it goes back into the overall pot, and they are free to expand any specific program area that they choose to, whether it's low income or
For clarification, I don't know if those SRECs are purchased with those funds ever touches Solar for All.
Yeah, that's what.
funds.
Yeah,
I don't
it
think
goes back into
Lance, from what I
SETF.
understand you're saying, and Ted can clarify as well, is that the purchase of the SRECs is with SCTF funds.
Yes.
And then the money made goes back into the programs that are funded by SCTF.
Yes.
So Solar for All funds are never touched from the SREC.
That program.
Yeah.
And do we have a sense of whether or not that program will expand, and will it expand under SETF? Or
That's
EDF?
a Ted question.
Yeah.
We have discussed this, but again, it's the DCSEU that kind of determines their program initiatives.
Right, where those are still under discussion right now, where this is the first launch of this sort of initiative for us.
And I think to add to that, I think you are seeing how this performs to determine whether to go do it again.
Gotcha. So that it'll just basically expand the SETF dollar.
Yes.
Yes. Now, if we do a similar initiative using RDF funding, then of course the dollars that come in will go back into the RDF fund.
But remember, we still have a solar goal under the SCTF.
Right, but how does it also meet your goal for raising outside funding?
It always counts towards that.
So it does count towards, so do you have a goal of raising $5 million from outside?
Yes.
And so, and it counts towards the $5 million. Got it.
And the $5 million's for the overall contract?
Yes, exactly. So that $5 million would be comprised of, let's say, we discussed a couple of minutes ago, the money we're receiving from PJM, that would count towards that $5 million. Any grants or foundation money that we might receive would count towards that $5 million as the assessor money would as well.
Yeah, and that sort of $5 million is not necessarily like allocated to specific programs. It's
No.
just increasing the budget.
Yeah.
Okay. Understanding we still need to meet percentage. Yeah.
Lance, I think you said this, but where is the 1.4 million for performance incentives coming from?
It's on line 3 that is coming from the SETF. So the total contract value prior to this model is 20 million. The 18,558 plus the 1.4 for performance incentive gives you that 20 million.
So that's a net increase this year. It
Yes.
was 18.5 this past year, and it's an increase.
Exactly.
Is that typical year over year?
No, this again is being driven primarily by the funding that the SU is bringing to the table. Had they not brought in the 375 from PJM, or had we not decided to do the Solar for All program, then the funding would remain at 20 million. The only way we exceed that 20 million is if we get some outside funding, so to speak.
And you said that the compensation for equity isn't changing. This is just additional funding to achieve the objective.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay. So you said that it would be tracked separately, but it actually will be used to achieve the same target.
Well, no, the Solar for All will be tracked separately.
Okay.
Not the PJM.
Okay.
Right, so for example, in our current contract, we have a goal to install a megawatt of solar a year. That goal remains over the course of the 5 years of the contract. And we'll take that out of the SCTF money to hit those targets. That will not be used. Our EDF money can't be used to hit those targets.
Okay. Thank you.
I do have another question. In section C4012.3, it mentions that the contractor shall be responsible for the development of all Solar for All program offerings. Is that referring to all Solar for All program offerings?
Well, when we say all under the DCSU's purview, so to speak.
All funded by this pot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't read it that way, so.
We can change that if you like. Funded under this contract or something like that.
Gotcha.
So if there were other groups also using solar, doing solar, you're saying there would also be other groups doing solar for all?
Yeah, I mean, it's
and
my
using using our ADF money?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Say that again, please.
To follow up on Nicole's question, this is not intended to say that the SCU will be the exclusive provider for solar for all.
No, it's not.
We could probably do at some point a presentation on Solar for All, because we're using different government partners along with SCU to just pitch for different pots depending on capacity and projects.
All good?
Are there any other substantial changes in methodology or anything that we should turn our attention to before?
No, not in this modification at all.
Anyone on the phone have any questions? All good? Thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, moving to updates. So thanks for including this. This is my request to add to the agenda because just like hearing in the ether all this good stuff is going on, and we talked about wanting to make sure that the board has an opportunity to take a look before things are bound in stone to see other opportunities for the SU. So it's helpful to hear. And there's probably listservs for each of these components, and then you guys can talk about them, but I know like when I've moved offices a couple of times I fall off lists, but it might just be a good idea to understand how is it that we could be apprised either as SEU or as individuals of all of the efforts, all the multiple efforts. So they're both legislative as well as executive. So thanks. No. Do up.
Yes, Rob is doing the legislative.
Yeah, I was waiting till okay.
When you're ready to do radio announcements, you let us know. Best time, best voice.
We're just winning everything, bro. Okay.
First lead. Yeah, okay. Good time.
All right, so as far as the legislative updates, the news is the Green Finance Authority found that passed final reading last week, and just waiting for the mayor to sign that.
So that's for the Green Bank.
Yes, it's the Green Bank.
When would it become effective, the Green Bank, if this is all, if she signs?
When the mayor signs.
Yeah. And then what do you think in terms of like startup and congressional approval?
Yes.
Are there regs?
We're going to move fairly aggressively in trying to get the board appointed, and the council goes on recess July 15th, so we probably won't have a board stood up until the end of September, early October, and then the board will make the decisions about hiring and all that, but we're we're trying to put pieces in place now to have an organization ready for the board to manage.
The 100% renewable portfolio standard expansion amendment act. That's under council consideration. That was signed to the Committee on Business and Economic Development, and with comments from the Committee on Transportation and Environment. And the Distributed Energy Resources Authority Act. That's also under council consideration. That was assigned to the Committee on Business and Economic Development.
That's the NWA one? The one that
Yes, that's not one.
And it's where, I'm sorry?
It's Committee on Business and Economic Development.
So what's generally the schedule for something like that? Are there hearings at this stage? Or
Okay, what's the question?
at committee stage?
Which thing?
The Distributed Energy Resources Authority. That's non-wires alternative.
Right. It depends. That it's under Councilmember McDuffie, and should he decide to hold a hearing, the question is they probably could not pass anything. Probably could not pass anything on 2 votes prior to the end of the council period. So, under old rules, the hearing would count or into the next council period. Someone had said that the rules may have changed on whether the hearing counts or not, so I don't know. But I don't see this bill going. I don't see it being passed in this session, but I may be surprised.
Mr. Wells, I think that was the consensus of Charles Allen's legislative director, who spoke at a meeting. Chairman Kane and I were there earlier this week, and he did not think that the bill would be passed this year as well because of the exact things that you mentioned. It would need a hearing, which would happen sometime probably after summer recess, and then there would be 2 readings of the full council, and he thought that there probably would be time to get that passed during this council year.
And would that, would any of these impact directly the work of the SEC or open up funding opportunities?
The DER legislation proposes, I think it's about $4 million that would come from the FETF to support this effort. So
an
it would,
additional
it
$4
would,
million
it would impact,
No, reduction.
it would reduce.
And the last thing I have is Clean Energy DC. Final version is being approved by Executive Office of the Mayor. Marshall is going to talk more about Clean Energy DC. So you'll hear a lot about that. And that's actually all I have.
Is there carbon tax legislation floating?
There is a proposal, and it's being discussed in a working group session, but no defined date of introduction, exploring different options as well as alternatives outside of what has already been proposed.
On the $4 million reduction, SETF is a larger bucket than just SEU, correct? Or do you
No,
all
it's
SETF
exclusive
funds?
to the, it funds the SEU.
And
So it would-
10% for DOE.
For the administrative.
Okay.
It's
So it
about
would
22
likely
million.
be $4 million directly out of the.
It would. That's the only pot. If it's SCTF funds as stated, it would be $4 million out of SCU.
How do we feel about that?
Well, I suspect that that the advocates from the outside wanted an additional $4 million, from what I understand. But I think that the introducers did not want to add another cost to ratepayers with the bill, and so at the same time that everything else is going on, family leave and other things, and funding Metro. So I think the compromise was to introduce without the increase, and certainly, when I also say that we had no conversation, have we did not know this legislation was going to be introduced. We didn't know anything about the legislation. So we were not asked to advise on funding it.
And just for the record, we are reviewing the legislation. We do have some concerns. There is customer data requirements, transfer of that information, billing information, system planning involvement as it relates to the electric distribution system.
Because it's by a board of
security concerns, privacy concerns, the role of the Public Service Commission, and a very transparent process that is there, where they're involved and engaged in those particular matters. So we have engaged the council member and really trying to understand the intent, the purpose, as well as the void that may have been identified in trying to address some of those particular issues.
Yeah, and I'd say on the funding issue, the real key question is this some, wherever the funding is, something worth spending money on it. And I would say the Public Service Commission, when we look at, we had no involvement, being totally active, no consultation at all. It's even, Peter Picard, in looking at it, is kind of asking what's the need. Already up to our ears and launched an update on what we're doing on non-wires alternatives already in a number of things, and DOE also things we've already ordered. That's what we do. Expected them to do,
right.
In terms of planning, in terms of the capital grid project, all of that. So, and I think that's the more fundamental question: that where do you get the money from? Is it me?
I don't disagree.
Yeah.
So
But yes,
there's
taking it out of
one
the
maybe a
SCU
means
and
to
all the work the SCU is doing.
Yeah.
This is Sandra. We are also looking at the legislation as proposed, and likewise, we were not consulted or contacted prior to its introduction. I have looked, my team is looking at it thoroughly and scrubbing it for a more technical analysis. I did know that one of the provisions allows OPC to be a member of the board without a vote. We would not be a member of any board without a vote. So that would be, I would have a problem with that and would not be able to support legislation that allows that.
This is Sean Scully. I kind of want to echo what Donna said. We've had some internal discussions. She kind of outlined some of the bigger points that obviously PEPCO is addressing internally. We're addressing those same issues in Washington Gas. We reviewed the legislation, and we do have our concerns, particularly around the data privacy and system planning, especially if you're moving towards the distributed generation model, which is this is trying to push towards some of the gas infrastructure in the districts to give over that authority to system planning to DARA, or however you want to call it, does cause some pretty significant concerns to the utility.
Thank you. I guess in terms of, given all the level of concern, do board members feel that there's a SEU role in commenting? Just from the SEU perspective, which maybe the SEU ought not to.
No. I mean, the SEU can't comment on legislation like this.
The board.
The board. You clearly have your own authority and voice with which you can express your views about legislation.
I think it's.
Could I know I've been silent and I have not been watching the parade, I promise. But what role does the DDOE play? Do you comment on this, or are you the authority, or what role does
So
as the Department of Energy and Environment, do you have a significant role in the legislation that's drafted, or not?
I'm not so sure we have a significant role in the way it's drafted. The DOE is more. The question first goes to process. That it's likely that we will provide testimony if there's a hearing in concert, on behalf of the mayor, and we'll, if we don't provide the testimony directly, we'll at least inform the testimony on behalf of the mayor. And then in terms of implementation, I don't think
recall
that
there's any role for
I don't think
DOE.
there's any role for
No,
DOE
exactly.
in
It's an
implementation.
independent authority.
Right.
Right. The only role for Public Service Commission is after this group of lay people, civilians, come up with this plan, then they give it to us. We've got no involvement on it. They just know we're changing something.
I think the authority creation would be most analogous to DC Water, if you think about their board composition.
Except it really doesn't have any authority,
It seemed
except
like
to
it
come up with a
was-
plan.
Right, right.
It looked more like it was a stakeholder input kind of a board.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Yeah, it looked at the board, with so many of the board members being appointed by the council, it could not have executive functions. So it would have to just be an advisory board. So it would not have direct authority.
So what do folks think of an advisory board comment? Not necessarily knowing right now what the comments look like, but I mean just maybe a group of people who are interested to talk about it.
My recommendation.
Timing wise, just wait to see if they're even gonna have it here.
Exactly.
I mean, that was what,
Sure.
that's what Councilman Allen's,
Yeah.
that person said, you know, it was up there.
So can
What
you all
looking
keep
at
us
and tracking,
informed?
and obviously
Yeah.
anything that attacks, whatever it's for, that would attack the money for the SCU, the ratepayer money.
Yeah.
Would be a concern.
Yeah. So can you guys keep us informed of if and when there is a hearing?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay.
Vicki, this is Sean Scully. One additional question, I guess, related to that. On the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund, and maybe this is more to the DOE folks in the room and Tommy. I was actually looking at some of the disclosures that we post, the quarterly disclosures for the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund on the DOE website. And the most recent ones in the last year or two don't include any attachments, which actually shows the fund transfers. And in order to verify what's being transferred over and what is publicly disclosed, there seems to be all the documents that are filed quarterly, but there are no longer attachments to any of those that actually show how much money is going to the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund every quarter.
Okay, this is Teresa. We will check on that. We do have all of that, those data, and they should be attached. So we'll check the website and update it if they have not been included.
Okay, much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So then that's into the, I'm sorry, did you tell us the clean energy PC? Was that what was on your list?
That was on my list, and Mark was going to talk about things.
Okay, thanks.
There's
Oh, sorry.
not much to say in the executive update other than, I'll say that I'm very concerned that so much funding is coming in through the agency. We're now the largest grant maker in the city for the agency. And and I expressed my concern to Councilmember Che in the hearing in my testimony that we want to be very careful and transparent and accountable with dollars as they're coming in. Now, especially REDF, even though sometimes people don't make the distinction between RDF and SDF, but especially REDF because that variability of funds coming in ranges from just a couple of years ago, 6 million and then 26 million. So moving a fund through the agency with a variability of $20 million is, and we're government, and so we want to, be sure that we're doing this right. So what we're doing is we're bringing in an outside assessment to be sure that it's primarily looking at REDF, but we're contracting with an outside assessor to look at the purpose of the funds and our utilization of the funds so that there's no surprises. And that goes to our contracting with SEU to be sure that, we're looking at everything that we're doing it in a way that's consistent. So the other thing that did Che heard my concerns and has asked their auditor, Kathy Patterson, to conduct an audit. We have a representative today from the city auditor, and they've added in the SEU into that, which I think it certainly creates a lot of work for my team, but it's what I want to happen. I've seen these audits coming out routinely or just recently regarding Housing Authority, or not Housing Authority, but DHCD and some others. And at first glance, I'd look at it and say, I'm not sure they did anything wrong here. But it was things like, did you recertify, or one of the findings in DHCD was that they didn't recertify eligibility for the people that got the housing. And I'm not sure I would have thought of that. I mean, there's so much pressure to get new housing. Are you constantly recertifying those that are in your housing? So there's things like that that I think are expensive, but we're trying to build in that and looking for everything we may not have thought of to have an overlay of accountability to the dollars. So that's on the executive side is something I can think of.
So just out of curiosity, because obviously I don't think we have any role, but is the auditor in lieu of the assessor you were
No, they're
proposing,
both.
in addition to, is the assessor an in-house DOE person?
No, we're contracting that out. Do you want to say anything about the process, where we're at with that?
Yes, it's actually been out on the street through OCP for at least 2 weeks now, and we're expecting to get the bids back in and make a selection. But the scope has been fully fleshed out in accordance with the directive.
And the primary overlap I see is that we transfer in different ways REDF funds to SEU, which is operating under SCTF funds. And it is interesting. I met with the chief of the Office of Risk and Risk Management, Office of Risk Management. So I met with the director and I laid all this out, and he said, almost anything you can do, there's still going to be something. And so I don't like to accept that, but we're going to start early on that.
What is the timing? When do you anticipate how long the analysis will take place?
So the city auditor works at their own rate. We have no control over that, just provide them information. The contract will have a timeline in it?
Yes, ours goes through December with different deliverables due at the end of September, October, and November. And the final report will be due in December.
I can't think of anything else in executive unless you guys are. Any other questions about the executive? Okay. Since nobody's saying anything, let me say that if you're on the line, you can mute. It'd be helpful. Thank you.
Somebody shuffling papers or something who's on the line. Okay.
That might be me.
Okay.
Thank you for admitting it. So also there was an IG review of this contract. Is that?
Yes, that is still ongoing. So the review that's happening by ODCA acknowledged the IG's review, so they said they will not.
That was happening by
the Office of the DC Auditor, which is currently doing the review of SCTF and REDF. They acknowledge the ongoing assessment that's currently happening by the IG's office. So they said they will not, replicate or duplicate any of that work. We've supplied quite a few documents, so it's still under review. We're waiting to hear what the next steps will be. But they've conducted interviews in person, and they have collected quite a few documents from them.
So that's also going to get folded into this audit?
No, they're separate.
They're separate.
So it's not informing it, or they're just totally separate?
Well, they are aware of it. Vilma wants to say something.
Sorry,
yeah, they mentioned it in the entrance. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Clean Energy DC. Thank you.
Chair of this esteemed table, if I may. Hello, it's an honor to present to the board very briefly, hopefully, on an update on the Clean Energy DC plans. As Robert Kelsey said, the final Clean Energy DC plan draft is currently with the Executive Office of the Mayor, and we expect to receive finalization soon and be publishing it. We presented to the board previously on Clean Energy DC. As you know, we published a draft plan in late 2016, on November 2016, and then we proceeded to have about a 1-year period of public review and comment over the course of 2017. Over the course of 2017, we had 20 activations and meetings in all 8 wards of the city, along with 3 citywide meetings. Meeting with hundreds of people about Clean Energy DC, getting lots of feedback. We collected 300 surveys from folks specific to Clean Energy DC. Simultaneously, there was also a statistically significant phone survey done with about 800 people by the agency as a whole, which had several questions in it about Clean Energy DC and Clean Energy policy that we were able to use. And we also had an equity roundtable that we convened of local and national experts on equity issues to see how we could better address concerns about equity and affordability in the plan and fold that in. When the final plan comes out, it'll be accompanied by a comment and response document with specific detailed responses to 114 topical comments. We received way more than that, but we consolidated by topic. So if 6 people said the same thing, we have 1 comment and 1 response. We've made major updates to the plan in response to all the people we heard from. The major updates are we've improved the modeling for the plan, so we're now projecting that if all the actions in the plan were taken, the district could achieve a reduction of 56% greenhouse gas emissions relative to the 2006 baseline established by Sustainable DC. That's slightly better than the original projections and definitely exceeding the 50% reduction target from Sustainable DC. To be very clear, this doesn't mean we are on track to achieve the district's greenhouse gas goals, without any action. This is specifically if all of these actions were done, we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 56% and put ourselves on a path to carbon neutrality by 2050. But obviously new work has to be done to make that happen. We also added a whole chapter coming out of that stakeholder work groups. We added a whole chapter on equity. We updated 20 different actions across the plan to address potential impacts to equity on affordability, structural inequities, and accessibility. And we also added specific actions aimed at better incorporating equity into future energy, climate, environmental planning for the district. Specific actions and recommendations about how we can better incorporate that in the future. We also added new actions on energy planning for district government operations. That action is sort of coming out of hope. We originally were going to have a whole subset of the plan that was more specific to district government operations. That didn't quite come together, but we incorporated what we did as a new action.
So, sorry, did you say there are new requirements?
Not new requirements. It's a recommendation for a strategic energy management plan for district government facilities in more detail than has been done so far. Obviously, that's not our department. That's the Department of General Services, but we've made a recommendation about that. We also, one of the main things we heard from the public was that there wasn't as much in the plan as they wanted about transportation, specifically about public transit. So we brought on a new subcontractor, and we came up with specific recommendations about net zero emission buses, which is to say electric buses, incorporating electric buses. You may have heard the district unveiled 14 new electric buses just a few weeks ago as part of the DC circulator fleet. So we've modeled out what it would look like to expand that to the whole circulator and then eventually WMATA fleet and recommendations about how that could proceed. We also have recommendations specific to how to better anticipate coming demand and use of autonomous vehicles in the district and how to ensure that autonomous vehicles are electric and our shared ridership vehicles, which is those are the key characteristics that will determine whether autonomous vehicles have a positive or negative environmental impact on the district. We also updated lots of other actions in the plan around just to sort of update things have happened, obviously, since November 2016, so we just wanted to make sure that the plan was as updated as possible, brought in the best and latest knowledge. We updated sections on codes, on DCSEU, on performance standards for buildings, local solar, and so forth.
What about the DCSEU?
So I'll get to that in one second.
Sorry.
It's fine. That was very brief because I was about to go into
Okay,
detail.
thank you. Good.
So we updated a lot of the actions. There are a bunch of actions in the plan that are recommendations to the DC for the DC Same Winds utility, or for either for the DCSU directly, or actions that will impact and affect what DCSU is involved with. All the recommendations for the DCSU are things that we are, in many cases, already working with the SEU on. They're things that SEU had incorporated in SEU's strategic plan already. So there's very high alignment. All of this is highly achievable. So that's really good. The major actions we updated with respect to the SEU were just, and many of these were sort of updates with tweaks. We didn't have any completely new actions related to the SEU. So everything that is in the draft plan recommended to the SEU is still in the final plan recommended to the SEU. In some cases, tweaked and updated to reflect stakeholder comments and latest and best knowledge. So we have updates about increasing data access to the SEU. DERA would be one way that could happen, but the SEU, there are many ways that could happen. The plan calls for the SEU to get better access to customer energy data confidentially so that they can make better planning decisions. It doesn't speak exactly how that should occur. The recommendations around DCSEU increasing its flexibility, doing longer projects with deeper savings, and having a long-term project. Check that long-term contract. That's of course already done, as what is heard a lot. Recommendations around operational energy management and integration with other programs, some of which is already happening, and others obviously integration with the Green Bank can't happen until there is a Green Bank, but that would move forward. There's been a lot of thought given in the development of the Green Bank to how this would interact with
that was going to be my question about, like, just sort of operationally, what does integration of the SEU and the Green Bank mean? Does it mean one is subsumed within the other?
Not at all. They're completely separate entities. The SEU is a contract of DOE. The Green Bank would be an independent, the Green Finance Authority. We see the SEU. I mean, I would let the SEU speak better to sort of how they see their role.
We've had 2 meetings thus far with the people who are setting up the Green Bank and the consultants that they have hired to help them design the offerings, so to speak, of the Green Bank. And none of those offerings to date have been rolled out. So there's not a one leads the other. It's partnering between both of the organizations. One of the things that we clearly have to figure out is where are there gaps in the marketplace right now that could be filled by the Green Bank in terms of the finance capacity that they will have once they start to receive some capitalization. And then how might the programs that we offer benefit from some of the financing that's offered from the Green Bank? So these are some of the preliminary discussions that we're having between the Green Bank and some of they have. Trying to say that out loud, retain someone to help them develop their programs. To think about how them.
And the PACE program, for those of you who will be rolled into the Green Bank. So, but the SEU stays separate. And to give you an example of the kind of work that the Green Bank could do that the SEU doesn't do, and I'm just speaking about a possibility that many ideas being discussed. But for example, in some other jurisdictions, people have done things like other Green Banks have done things like having, instead of, obviously doing an energy audit doesn't get you savings in and of itself. It reveals potential savings. So it's very difficult to attribute savings and just hand out money for an audit. The SEU doesn't do that. But you could do a thing some other jurisdictions have done wherein you loan money out for an audit. It's a forgivable loan. If the people do the things recommended by the audit, you forgive the loan. And if they don't do them, well then they clearly didn't use the audit, so they have to pay the money back with interest. That's the kind of sort of financial, one of many examples of financial instruments that the Green Bank could do that is not sort of within the scope of the SCU. So getting back to Clean Energy DC and other recommendations, there's recommendations in the plan around ECSU tracking greenhouse gas savings, which of course the SCU already does, though it's not a formal tracking in all of the contract. We recommend that the SCU, as we roll out a net zero energy code, the new code that's coming out, which Jay will talk about, will have an optional path for net zero energy, performance path for net zero energy home buildings as optional, and we're hoping to engage with the SCU on potentially providing incentives, for that sort of thing. There'll be a building that, if we move towards having as the plan recommends, performance standards for buildings, there's a role for the SCU, obviously, in helping provide the incentives that will make that achievable. The other recommendations, we've talked some about the SCTF funding. Obviously, cutting money from the SCTF, as in some legislation that's been introduced, is not good. The plan specifically recommends actually a slight increase to that, to sort of recommend to fill a gap and to make sure the SCU is achieving the full energy efficiency potentials here in the district. The recommendations in the plan around submetering and exploring ways that the SCU or the Green Bank might be able to incentivize submetering. Again, that's something where attribution is tricky, and we'll have to figure out what the best role for that is. That's something we're hearing, especially from a lot of big entities like universities, that there's a real need for incentives around submetering. So that's something that has to be explored. The plan has a recommendation for a centralized online platform for residents about energy efficiency, which obviously would include information about the SCU as well, expanded green jobs training, and obviously there's recommendations around local solar and solar proliferation, which integrates very well with the SCU is doing. So that's sort of a subset of the plan. Has 57 actions. That was a sort of prior subset of some of the ones I think most applicable to the SCU.
Is there anything related to the SCU around peak demand?
The plan, the SCU has a tracking goal around reducing energy demand. The SCU, a bridge contract, used to have an actual specific performance target around peak demand, but due in part to data access that the SCU doesn't have to sort of real-time energy data, having any kind of performance target around peak demand is challenging. You can track the peak demand reductions that we're estimating are coming from your incentive, and the SCU will be tracking all around that. But specifically going after peak demand programs requires a different level of data and approach that the SCU has. So that's not something that the SCU it's not a key part of their contract right now. And for various reasons, it's not a key part of the Clean Energy DC plan, mainly because we were trying to focus on long-term greenhouse gas reductions in the plan, and not sort of short-term time of use issues. But it's definitely, I would be open to saying it's a thing that requires further study and investigation by the department.
This is Sean Mizrock. I have a quick informational question about charging infrastructure, electrification. Yeah. This is, in the interest of full disclosure, it's an area that I'm becoming involved in recently. But what is DC planning, if anything? In other words, if there are these ambitious plans for electrification and alternative energy vehicles and whatever, is that charging infrastructure issue incorporated in this plan?
Yes, yes it is.
And if so, what is it that's public that you're thinking about?
Let me just say, as a matter of policy goals, first and foremost, it's public transit. It's getting in charging infrastructure for buses, changing the circulator bus system over to electric, and then working with Metro to try to get them to do the same. So public investment will focus on public transit. In terms of infrastructure, and Donna can add into this, but in terms of infrastructure being paid for by the government, for cars, it really starts with not paying for it. It starts with building codes. That for all new buildings, there's charging infrastructure that's required, and we're looking for that to be far more aggressive going forward in terms of what charging infrastructure is to be there. We're working in partnership or supportive of PEPCO's initiative around EV charging, and Donna may want to say more about that, but before that, we have been required at some level by Councilmember Che's committee, or DDOT has been, around implementing some charging infrastructure for cars in the city. But frankly, I think the last thing I'll throw out there is that the settlement with VW on its own will create corridor-based charging infrastructure along the eastern seaboard going north, but the funds they're getting to us would go primarily into not charging for cars, but infrastructure for buses and some other things that we'll do with those funds to reduce NOx gases. Anybody want to add on to that, Donna?
Just wanted to comment, and also being careful as well, because with Chairman Kane, and also the fact that we do have a matter pending before the commission. And the only comment I'll make towards that is that we did, and the commission is aware, we did convene working sessions to begin talking again with the various stakeholders that are at the table around that particular filing, and taking into consideration a lot of the feedback that we have heard from numerous stakeholders. So John, we can talk a little bit more about that, but we have been having working sessions looking at public infrastructure as well as time of use, looking at multi-dwelling units, looking at education, looking at car sharing type concepts in a multitude of other areas, and also focusing on fleet as well.
Yeah, and I'd add, I believe we anticipate that Pepco will be filing a revised version of the rate plan or demonstration project that they had originally filed with us, which we didn't act on. We moved it into our energy infrastructure modernization MEDSIS docket, and we, I don't have time to say it, but we have just in that docket now hired, contracted with the Smart Electric Power Association to take that to the next step. We just announced that on last week, and they will be doing three things under that contract. First of all, they're having a technical conference on June 27th. Be sure, and a lot of people have already signed up for that. Everybody knows that. We're going to set up work groups within that. Yeah, electric vehicles and charging will be certainly one of the work groups, as well as non-wireless alternatives and a number of other things. They will also be looking at whether or not we need to get some more information about where the constraints are in the electric and the gas delivery system. And it's called a system assessment, but we're really talking about where are there. So, for example, if you're going to electrify the entire bus fleet, which is a great goal, you know, where do you charge them? Where do they charge? What kind of infrastructure then do we need to build? What, you know, is there a substation? Is there the right for that high-powered kind of thing? So that is partly what we'll be looking at in MEDSIS and what we'll be looking at in any kind of infrastructure plans that Pepco brings to us, or wash the gas that involves, you know, because we also have buses now that are compressed natural gas. And so that's a charging issue also.
So let me just make 3 quick comments without wading in any way, shape, or form into whatever regulatory issues and, you know, what's before anybody else. One is extremely exciting, and I think it's as critical perhaps as anything, planning now to try to figure out what DC is going to look like, you know, 10, 15 years from now. 2, it's, and 2, you know, obviously, I think there needs to be a lot of flexibilities and right choices made. And then I'm I sit on the advisory board over the Department of Energy for hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles. I would just offer that you shouldn't necessarily discount, fuel cell and sort of filling stations, that are happening up and down the West Coast. California's putting in an enormous amount, but they're having some, Toyota in particular is facilitating it, but they're having regulatory problems trying to get them on the East Coast. But particularly for heavy duty vehicles too, which fits into what Tommy was suggesting, which is when you're electrifying a fleet, particularly for the city and or city services, fleet vehicles are probably, a much better way to get into, transitioning to alternative energy vehicles. So I don't need to get into that now. I'm just glad I raised the issue because it's very exciting. So I applaud the thinking, and I'll try to get involved, in these meetings and things that are coming up in the planning process.
Okay, hi Vicki, I'm here.
Oh, great. Okay, I was just gonna send you the call-in number. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's funny.
Okay, just one more question, Marshall, on this, that you said before the mayor for signing.
For,
Do you have a
for
plan for
approval, and then
time
we
to
will
release it?
Once we get approval for releasing it from the mayor, the draft we sent over was just sort of text and graphics. We will be it'll be going through a design process to make it a little bit more visually attractive, which we anticipate will take about 2 weeks, and then we will be ready to just release it to the public. This is a planning document released by the department. It does not go to council for approval, nor needs to be signed by the mayor in a sort of bill signing kind of form. Anything else?
Is the idea then that with for legislation, or how will the recommendations be implemented?
It's an interesting question. We're looking at the possibility of either an omnibus clean energy bill or a number of separate bills.
Some of the things may not be legislation,
not
they must be budget things and other things, right? Yeah.
And quite a bit of it is going to be undertaken by the agency, similar to the way the Sustainable BC Plan. A lot of the recommendations in there were implemented by DOE and several other sister agencies. So the agencies are the ones that take the lead in implementing those recommendations that are put forward in the plan. Because as Director Marshall pointed out, every action requires council legislation for us to be able to undertake it.
Some pieces may require legislation, other pieces can be undertaken directly by this agency, and we'll be moving forward on them. Some would be undertaken directly by other agencies, such as DDOT in the case of Number of Transportation Actions, or DCRA in the case of codes. And other actions are things that we'd be working with, say, the Public Service Commission around things like grid modernization. There's a whole subchapter on energy system modernization, which aligns very closely with the filings that we've already made with the Commission, and we'll be working with the Commission and with the electric and gas utilities on that.
Are you anticipating, Director Wells, something to...
Residents can apply for energy assistance and discounts on your utility bill. Ask an OPC representative about eligibility requirements. I don't need an OPC representative. Stop it.
For the music break,
That's really weird.
are you anticipating this council period for the rollout of the omnibus, or are you thinking, some portions, or is it still up in the air?
The Office of the People's Counsel may be able to help you. Our consumer complaint specialist is available to contact.
So, interestingly, the carbon tax movement has increased some thoughts around providing an alternative. I mean, they're not necessarily competitive, but we have to provide guidance of where the city's going in terms of meeting the clean energy goals. And we do see that the clean energy plan is a roadmap, and Interestingly, from what I've seen, the carbon tax proposal has been substantially changed to align more with the clean energy plan. But frankly, there's a lot more to be gained in a city that doesn't generate a lot of energy from fossil fuels. There's a lot more to be gained from building energy performance standards. And we have a track record now of gathering data from buildings 50,000 square feet or larger having a report. And we are looking at the possibility of a building energy performance standard requirement in law with graduated goals to help get us to the goals that the mayor and the council has set. So in terms of timing of that, we had a contract out that through C40 that they helped fund a study for us. We are talking at length with LA and New York City because it's the built environment, it's not the new buildings that we have to retrofit. And so, I mean, new buildings are important, but it's really what's already been built. And we're thinking about this. But also, well, so yeah, we're thinking about that, and we've talked to, because of the carbon tax, folks have come to talk to us, and that included DCBIA, Federal City Council, AOBA, and the Chamber. And we're working with them as a group. But again, I don't know about timing.
Because I guess we'll hear about this in the building codes discussion, but it doesn't sound like those would necessarily be in this round of building code, of the building energy code revision.
It's not, I mean, it's a parallel process. The legislation would set targets.
If there's no...
You doing a sustainable DC update?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kate is going to do the sustainable DC update in Maribeth's absence. Branch Chief, USA.
One slide.
Hello. I don't even
Hi.
Right.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Oh, thanks. And if we need more, I can grab more. Sure. So I'm Kate Johnson. I'm the Chief of the Green Building and Climate Branch in the Urban Sustainability Administration. So we were asked to give a brief update on turn it up.
The volume.
The volume on the phone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I can be louder too. So we are working on an update to our sustainable DC plan, which hopefully you all know and love. It's our plan to be the healthiest, greenest, most livable city by 2032. So it turned 5 years old this year, and so we're passing around our 5th year progress report. And so as we reached our 5th year, we embarked on a process to update the plan and have been working on it actually since this time last year. And we've reached the point where we've had a series of working groups. We've been working with a team of technical experts led by the Integral Group, who also worked on Clean Energy DC, on revising the goals and the targets and the actions in the plan to reflect where we've come as a city in the last 5 years and where we think we need to go in order to meet our high-level goals. So we're about to release for public comment an updated outline of the plan, so just the goals, the targets, and the actions. So that will be released on Thursday. And we're trying something new. We're going to be using a website called Civic Comment, which will allow people to provide very detailed comments on any aspect of the plan. And so we'll be sure to get that out to everyone here, and so you can comment online. But we're also interested in having a more in-depth conversation with the advisory board sometime in July. And so I think Maribeth and Dan will be following up to gauge interest in that and to schedule something where we can talk much more in depth, especially on the actions that are related to the SEU. So in terms of where we go from here, the outline will be out for public comment for about a month, so through July 15th. We're simultaneously starting work on the fuller report. So those who know Sustainable DC well know that the goals and the targets and the action are accompanied by a narrative. And so we're working on that now, and we'll have a draft of that, which will reflect any of the comments we received this summer by August. Again, another round of input will be done, and then we'll have the final updated Sustainable DC 2.0 by the end of the calendar year. So sometime in December. Two questions. I know a lot of you have already provided lots of input, whether it was in participating in one of our mini working groups or through conversations we've had with sister agencies on updates that are needed. So thanks for all your input so far, and we look forward to getting more input from you moving forward.
Thank you.
Great. And do we have enough copies, or do we need any more of the progress report? That's good. All right.
I think I'm next to talk about the building code. So my name is Jay Wilson. I'm in the Office of the Chief of Staff, and I work on policy, planning, and implementation around green buildings. And I serve on the Construction Code Coordinating Board as the agency's representative on the CCCB, which works to pass building codes for the city. So the building code is one of our most important tools we have in achieving the net zero and carbon neutrality goals. It's detailed in the Clean Energy DC plan, as Marshall was talking about. And it raises the bar for all projects, especially new construction and deep renovation. We renovate about 3% of buildings per year in sort of a level 3 alteration. So the building code moves everything forward to achieve that minimum standard. And in this round of code updates, so the last code update was 2014. This will be the DC 2018 codes. The Energy Conservation Code was probably the most changed out of any of the different code books in the IBC. So a couple of highlights about the code. So for the first time, we're including efficiency requirements for residential new construction, including a provision that all residential new construction is solar ready. And again, these are the proposed building codes. I'll talk a little bit about the process that we go through to get them to a final approved and adopted state. On the commercial energy side, the Energy Conservation Code would result in about a 15% gain in efficiency compared to the current building code. And so there's two pathways for achieving that. One is the prescriptive pathway. So a majority of the measures are based on 189.1. It's an ASHRAE standard. The 2013 standard, and that's the standard for high performance buildings. So we took the energy piece of that, integrated it with ASHRAE 90.1 2013 as our model code. And the efficiency increases are due to increased requirements for mechanical systems, ventilation and lighting requirements, required improvements for level 3 alterations, including additional insulation when a roof is replaced, facade and envelope improvements, air sealing, and testing improvements, requirements for a continuous thermal barrier, and that all commercial buildings are also solar ready. Under the performance pathway, we took the ASHRAE 90.1 2016 Appendix G. So we skipped the 2013 baseline code and went to the 2016 code and adopted those provisions as they're a little bit stronger from a performance standpoint than the 2013 codes. And so that we also included consistent modeling requirements to simplify the code. There were previously 3 different codes from an energy standpoint that a building and designer would have to look at. We simplified that into one DC commercial energy code.
And I'm sorry, were you saying that the 2 pathways, one is 2013, one is 2016, or was one optional, one mandatory?
The 2 pathways, designer project could do either. One's prescriptive and one's performance path. The prescriptive requirements are based on 90.1 2013 and ASHRAE 189.1 2013. Lots of numbers and acronyms. And the performance path is based on ASHRAE 90.1 2016. And so we had also adopted Appendix Z. So Appendix Z is a voluntary net zero energy performance pathway that any project could volunteer to design their project under. And so the Construction Code Board and the technical advisory groups felt that by including this in code language, it gives the industry a place to aim toward. And it would also give the SU, DCRA, and other entities an option for incentivizing that voluntary code update as we look toward higher performance buildings toward our ultimate goals of all net zero energy buildings by 2026. So that's sort of the code as an overview. A little update on where we are in terms of timing. So the Construction Code Board completed development and review of the code. We have sent those approved codes to the mayor's office. They're currently with OPLA for review. The mayor reviews the codes, and then we'll put them out for public comment after they're approved by their office. The public comment period, when we proposed the 2014 codes, it went through 2 different public comment periods before it was ultimately adopted. We would anticipate that this code cycle would be similar. Each public comment period would be about 60 days. So we're looking toward the end of the calendar year to final adoption of the codes as they're proposed, barring any major public comments or dissenting opinions on where we're headed with these codes.
And the adoption is done by the board or by the council?
By council.
By council.
Yes. So I would say, one takeaway for this group is that each code cycle is taking about 4 to 6 years from an initial kind of review and development through implementation and adoption. Once the codes are approved by council, there's still a 1-year grace period before all projects in the district would be required to build according to that code. And so, for the SCU and others that are looking toward, higher performance buildings, there's an opportunity here to incentivize projects to go beyond code. And particularly, looking toward net zero energy development, I know that the SCU is working on incentives for performance guidelines or performance rebates and things like that. So I think that, in addition to education and technical assistance, will be critical as we move through the public comment and engagement periods and then finally to code adoption.
Has Jill Stern given any update when, I know 2018 is going to start since we're behind. Is she going to start I haven't seen anything regarding the tags.
We've just started now talking about reformulating the tags, the technical advisory groups, and how we can kind of jumpstart the process into the next code while this code is still going through review.
Right.
Right now, I think if we start the tag process now, we'll be looking to adopt probably the 2018 codes, or maybe jump to the 2021 code. We're still trying to figure that out. It's also possible that the energy code moves at a different timeline than the rest of the building codes. Our city hasn't done that in the past, but other cities have. And because most of the technical needs are on the energy side, that may be a strategy as well.
That's interesting. Do you anticipate any, it's been through a lot of vetting already, controversy, pushback?
Not in a significant way, no. I think I didn't talk about the technical advisory group process, but it's composed of both public and private partners and stakeholders. So it's already gone through a series of comment and review by public and private stakeholders. So we're hoping that through education, we'll have buy-in from all parties. When the 2014 codes were passed, there were no negative comments to council, and it was passed unanimously. So we hope for a very similar pathway this time. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks all for these updates. sorry. Okay, yes, that would be me. So Lenny was kind enough to get on the phone. He was not going to originally be able to make it to do a debrief of the conference. Lenny, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you.
It's always one of these things about what we're all trying to achieve. When you general any emission reduction activity results in increases in electricity, and of course at the same time there's huge demand for energy efficiency. So one of the reasons I signed us all up for the fundamentals of the U.S. electric power industry, because I know personally I needed this, and I think some others would agree, that I needed to better understand how power gets moved around the country, how it gets traded, what is it manufactured. And so we have signed up to was actually met, Vicki and I went to one of the courses that's offered by PBS Energy Training called Fundamentals of the U.S. Electric Power. And I don't know about you, Vicki, but I learned a lot. So I never knew how the integrated system operating worked. I know that people bid in power, but it's a very situation where understanding capacity options, understanding how they keep the lights on from minute to minute. I needed to better understand. I don't know about you, but I found it helpful.
In terms of the SEU, did you find it helpful, or?
I think I needed to understand why, and I know it was something that, I don't know when this was decided, but it was decided that they should try to do it. Yeah. And since they're not a generator, darling, really, except as a distributed generator, maybe, but they don't really actually own the power that's, generated by the installation that it makes. It never made sense to me why they should bid into PJM. Quite frankly, still don't. Except to the extent that the council's intention to have a means of controlling, managing distributed generation resources, it does have some, it does affect the amount of distributed generation in the district. So, it's a question of understanding where all the discussion of CERs comes in. That help?
Yeah, I just asked Ted for clarification. My understanding is what the SEU is bidding into PJM is energy efficiency. That is non-use of electricity, not generation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're bidding in energy efficiency. There are people in the district who sell their excess energy into PJM. For example, I think GSA, from its steam plant, sells wholesale its electricity into PJM. But what the SEU is bidding in is energy efficiency. And I think that's what PEPCO, through its direct load control program, its air conditioner recycling, is bidding in energy efficiency. It is not using electricity.
Bidding in a negative.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's more of a demand response.
I just felt with something, and we have a lot of people on the board, including Julie, who are not power people, and they provided us with the basis of power system. For that, it was very helpful.
It might be interesting at some future meeting to have PJM come and talk about how that works and what impact it has on things the SEU trying to do.
That could be a good idea. I think I ended up feeling the takeaway was that while it was very, very interesting course, it was which are like comparable to an SEU issue because it wasn't focusing on demand response or energy efficiency bidding into market. It was more generators and people who seem to just like make up money, take advantage of like price differential to market. It's just a market, right? It was like sort of not attached to any real thing. You know?
But it is
but-
interesting because with how this SEU works,
It's the company.
as opposed to an SEU, say in an integrated, vertically integrated state where your energy efficiency is all done essentially by what the utility does. They understand how that PJM market works and how the independent generation and all of that impacts the way the SEU goes about, or any of us go about buying energy. Yeah.
That's my point. I use this to try to put into context. I had no context in which to put all of the debate about distributed generation.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah.
So, distributed generation just doesn't happen willy-nilly, and, the utilities have a context in which they can sell either their own generation or generation to buy an integrated system, or maybe in the future, you're talking about a distributed system. The council may put out legislation. I need to first the context.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And learning what the tools were.
Not DCSU specific, no.
Right.
Vicki, this is John Rizrock. I've got to ring off.
Right.
Apologies. But,
No. Thank you. We got to
I
close.
hopefully will be in touch later.
Okay. Thank you. We do have to close. And thank you, Lenny,
All right, thanks.
for getting on and providing that. I think just a quick question is, and it sort of maybe would become the same as the SUAB retreat, but what the timing is to expect an EM&B report, since that's what triggers our deadline for our next annual report.
We're expecting the first draft of the report by mid-July. Hopefully we'll get it finalized, maybe I would say by the end of July, probably first week in August. Once we have the final stamped, then the 90-day clock starts from then, so to speak.
So it would be like mid-August is probably final stamp, then
To be on the safe side, yes.
September, October, November, so before Thanksgiving. Okay, that's not building up, thank you. I'll just quickly wrap up what I heard for the action items. One was looking at the language in the Solar for All that addresses whether the SEU is the exclusive provider of all SFA energy programs. Yeah, that was one. Right. Second was to please keep us informed of legislative activities on DERA. Third was the request from Sean regarding making sure that the attachments are present on the website regarding FETF transfers. And then I think the last that came up was an idea of a PJM speaker coming to a board meeting so we could figure out and hear some more about the bid interaction and opportunities. Anybody have anything else?
One of the former public services already marketed.
Yes, Lori is,
She came to our
she's
office
the
and
government
spoke to
relations
us,
person for DC, Delaware, and I think
Okay.
Florida. We can arrange to arrange for her or someone else. They can do it basically, taking our staff up there, up to Valley Forge, staff, information, to see what it looks like, how it works. And not only how the energy trading works, but it does give a context of how.
Well, that could be our retreat, field trip.
Particularly now that, the new FERC order was to include storage as a generator or as a DER or as energy efficiency.
Right.
So the kinds of opportunities, I think, for the SEU with some of this new stuff, the way it's operating.
Thanks all. Thank you.
I predicted we wouldn't be able to get through half that agenda.
That's a tight ship.
So I'll see you in a few.